Lieutenant Governor candidates for the state of Vermont this year. They are, from left to right, David Zuckerman, the Progressive and Democratic nominee, and Randy Brock, the Republican nominee. We'll have opening and closing statements. We'll ask the candidates to keep their answers to about a minute. Go over and you will hear this menacing sound. You've heard it once before, I'm sure. The questions are coming tonight from us and also from some of you who have contributed through social media through the course of the last several days. You can use the social media hashtag NBC5Debate. We'll get to that a little later. So if we're ready, let's begin. We flipped a coin, and the first opening statement will come from Randy Brock.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you for hosting this debate this evening, and thank you and the audience for taking the time to watch it. I am Randy Brock. I'm a candidate for Lieutenant Governor. I think Grandma Moses said it best when she said, you know, there are not many Vermonters in heaven, because once they get there and take a look around, they just head right back to Vermont. And that's the point. That's why we live here, because Vermont is a great place. And sure, we have some problems, but we all have problems that can be dealt with. And that's the reason that I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, to focus on issues that we can solve. And the most important one of those issues, the issue that affects us the most, is the issue of our economy, jobs in the economy. We always are focused on dealing with fixing the potholes in the budget road, fixing the things that we have to do in the next 2 years. But as a Lieutenant Governor, with a blank sheet of paper, you have the ability to look ahead, to look at the long term, to look at what we need to do to create not just an affordable Vermont, but an economically vibrant Vermont. And that's what I want to be focused as doing as your Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, David Zuckerman.
Well, thank you. My name is David Zuckerman. I am running for Lieutenant Governor. I have about 18 years of legislative experience, 14 in the House and 4 in the Senate, working to bring people into the process to resolve our challenging issues of economics, housing, environmental issues. I also run a small business. I have a farm with my spouse. We raise about 20 acres of vegetables, chickens, and pigs. We employ 3 people year-round and 12 people through the summer. That experience is what most Vermonters have. Small business, trying to make ends meet. I first got into politics when I volunteered for Bernie Sanders' campaign in 1992. He inspired me about what public service could be, bringing people's voices into the process where historically we all look at it as corporate money and political whirlwind in the State House. We have to bring more people into the process, just as we did with civil rights, with civil unions and marriage equality, raising our minimum wage, and working towards affordable health care. When I farm the land, I want to make our land healthier for the future, and that's what I want to do as your public servant as Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Thank you both. Question one for both of you. In the VPR poll that was released last week, almost 70% of likely voters said they know little or next to nothing about you. So tell us, why do you want this job, and what has prepared you in your life to be a heartbeat away from the governorship? Let's start with you, Mr. Zuckerman.
Well, thank you. I started in my opening talking about some of the experience I have, but really it's about our values. Here in Vermont, we have such tremendous community values around all of our neighbors having an opportunity in our future, whether it's having a quality education system, and we need to do more to make higher education affordable for our Vermonters, whether it's having affordable housing, which we know many are struggling to find, whether it's a healthcare system that right now is tragically not working well at all, and work to improve that so that we all have accessible, affordable healthcare like all other industrialized nations around the world. Those are the values and issues that I care about, and I have experience of 18 years working in the legislature, bringing people together, passing marriage equality, which throughout the country we were a leader on, first in the nation as a legislature, raising the minimum wage, as a leader, putting more money in working Vermonters' pockets. Affordable housing, where we've created more perpetual affordable housing in Burlington and Chittenden County throughout the state by fully funding the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. Those are the kinds of values I bring to the table, bringing people into the process so that Vermonters' voices are the leading voices in that State House.
Mr. Brock.
I have a long record of experience in a variety of areas. I've been a soldier, I've been a policeman, I've been a polygraph examiner, I've been a small business owner who started and grew a small business from one person to over 1,000 people right here in Vermont, or at least based in Vermont. And I've been an officer of a major corporation dealing with finance and financial areas. I've served as Vermont State Auditor, where I've looked under the hood of state government as to what works and what doesn't. And I've served 2 terms in the Vermont State Senate. This depth of experience gives me a background that is wide-ranging and that's also deep. I've focused on Vermont because this has been my home for my entire working life. I've raised a family here, I've built a business here, and I've lived here and intend to retire here. I want to make Vermont a better place, and I want to look at all the things that affect my neighbors and my friends and to make them better and to make them work better, just as I've done in every job and in every position that I've had. Thank you very much.
Speaking of jobs, improving the job market and the economy seem to be the top priority for most voters and most candidates this year. Mr. Brock, you made mention to it just earlier in your opening statement about it being your top priority. What's your best idea to improve either the job market or the economy here in the state of Vermont?
Well, I think the best idea about improving the overall economy is to look at the fact that Vermont is rated almost dead last in the nation by virtually every survey that looks at economic development and business friendliness. And one of my real focuses is to make sure that the attitude of government, both at the top and the middle of government, changes so that we welcome business, we welcome business expansion, and we welcome the things that will enable us to retain the businesses that we have, which is a high priority. My focus is on being an ambassador for jobs in the economy, and to do some very specific things in terms of improving the rural economy in the area of agriculture and branding, in focusing on building niche industries, particularly in financial services, in looking at revamping the EB-5 program, which has been a disaster, so that it actually does something that's effective for Vermont and helps build our economy while at the same time providing the kinds of controls that are necessary to prevent the problems that we've had. All of these are things that I believe can make a significant difference to the future of Vermont.
Mr. Zuckerman, same question to you. What is your best idea, and if you could be specific, to improve either the job market or the economy?
Well, what I hear when I talk to business owners around the state are 2 major concerns. One, when they try to recruit people, when those folks come here, the cost of housing is a huge impediment to getting those folks to move here. The second is that folks in Vermont aren't always as well trained and equipped to fill the jobs that are out there. We've actually had about 15,000 to 16,000 jobs expanded in Vermont in the last 6 years. And so what I find we need to do is do more for affordable housing. We need to either adjust Act 250 so that you can have density bonuses with affordable housing in all of our urban and town centers. We need to do more job training and improve our accessibility to higher education and technical education so that people are equipped to do those technical jobs that in Vermont employers are looking for those employees. So it's also about providing childcare and making sure childcare is accessible and affordable for our working families. We have jobs and we have people looking for jobs, but that match has to happen, and that's where we need to work better in government to help make those matches.
Montpelier is facing another budget gap. This is not a new story. It seems that we go through this year after year. Do you have a specific idea or 2 of a line item in Vermont's budget that could be cut? And how would you rate the legislature's performance in developing a sustainable budget? And Mr. Zuckerman, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. There's often a discussion out there that says we have deficit spending every year. I just want to put that to rest. Every single year, we close the year having not done deficit spending. We find ways to cut, which is usually 60 to 70% of the gap that we start with. And yes, we find ways to raise some revenues to make sure we do not cut services to the bone for our working Vermonters. Some would argue that we should not have raised those fees or taxes at all. Ultimately, that would have led to greater pain for Vermont working poor and our middle class. As far as specifics, I serve on the Education Committee and would like to see us combine our human services and our education agency more in the schools so that we don't duplicate services. We can allow our teachers to teach and our human services and social worker individuals to help work with those kids that are having challenges. We can use that space in our schools to improve the outcomes for our kids and reduce our overall cost of providing the services. That's one specific job. I would also say that we do need to change our cannabis laws. In Massachusetts, just recently, polls showed 15% majority support for that change in law. We can let other states lead us, or we can be on the forefront, create the best jobs out there on it, reduce teen use, and get the economic benefit that will help our tourism industry.
Same question, Mr. Brock.
Vermont needs to do what Vermonters do, and that is control their spending and match their spending to their income. We've raised fees and expenses, or we've raised the amount of money that we spend by $700 million over the past 6 years. We've raised it at the rate of 5% per year, every year, and even going forward in the same way, whereas our economy has only been growing at about 2%. We need to restrain the amount of spending that we do, and we need to spend smarter. We need to look at making a more efficient government. We need to look for the waste and duplication that exists, particularly in the area of human services, in which there's significant overlap between fiefdoms or silos within state government. We need to look at Medicaid spending, where there's significant economies that can be achieved through better and more careful and more judicious spending and a reduction in errors. And we need to avoid focusing on cannabis as a revenue source because the numbers associated with it simply don't work. We can look at Colorado as an example, apply it to Vermont's situation and Vermont state budgets, and none of the things that folks seem to want to do when they believe cannabis is a major revenue source hold true. The numbers simply aren't there.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Next, NBC5's Leanne Denyer, who's been tracking social media and email, has the next question for us.
Yeah,
Leanne?
social media has played such an integral role in the campaign season so far. So we're going to take our first question from Buster Coswell. He writes us in from Facebook. Do you support equal unemployment benefits for Vermont farm workers? Mr. Brock, you'll take this one first.
Well, Buster has raised this issue in the legislature for a long time and for a number of years, and I think it's certainly something that we ought to look at in terms of equity, and I believe that that's something the legislature should hold hearings on.
Well, I would say I've talked with Buster many times about this, and I think he also understands some of this has to do with the federal unemployment law, where on the federal level, unemployment doesn't kick in until $20,000 of quarterly payroll, as opposed to $2,000 for other businesses. And that's certainly an area to address. At the same time, we have to recognize that our farms are not thriving right now, given the price of milk, et cetera. And so we need to make sure that our farms are thriving at the same time. It's a very difficult balance, but we always have to look out for our workers, whether they be farm workers or any other workers in any other sector, which is why I also agree that we need to raise the minimum wage, and we need to make sure that people can earn a dignified wage where they can pay for their health care, their housing, and any other everyday costs, food, transportation. We do have a broken economy because ordinary Vermont workers are not making a livable wage, and that's a high priority for me.
Thank you both. Next question for Mr. Zuckerman. As you know, a citizens group that strongly supports basing the F-35 fighter at the Air Guard station in South Burlington on Sunday declared you not fit to lead the Vermont Air National Guard. Now, the Lieutenant Governor does not lead the Guard unless something terrible were to happen to the governor, but that aside, the group cited your opposition to the F-35 as evidence that you don't understand the Vermont Guard or the role its pilots played in New York after 9/11. Could you clear the air on this and tell us why a member of the Guard should vote for you?
Well, first I'll say, with the language they took from 2013, that I spoke poorly, and I do apologize for that. I have tremendous respect for our service personnel in the Guard and National Service as well, for their willingness to put their lives on the line for all of us, whether it be in a terrorist situation, a national tragedy, or, as we had in Vermont with Hurricane Irene, a natural disaster. Our Guard, whether it be the Air or Army, serve us at the drop of a hat, putting their families aside, and I have tremendous respect for all of you. And I want to apologize again for speaking very poorly at that event.
Mr. Brock.
I listened to what David said at that event and other statements that he's made in support of the F-35. And I'm very, very concerned about those statements and the judgment reflected in those remarks. I'm not sure that those were singular remarks, and remarks that seem to indicate that when pilots on 9/11, in the most dreadful situation that we could imagine, simply flew over a site that had already been bombed and made no impact and had no value to our national security, I think is extremely unfortunate. I understand Senator Zuckerman's apology. I'm not sure if the members of the Guard, particularly looking at the statements, the way they were made, and his consistent opposition to the F-35, particularly when Senator Bernie Sanders, his mentor, does not oppose the F-35 and indeed supports it. It shows that Senator Zuckerman, I believe, is far outside of the mainstream thinking on the value of our Guard and the importance that it plays in the defense of our country.
Let me follow up. Do you think the F-35 basing in Vermont is a settled issue, Mr. Brock?
I don't know if it's a settled issue because there's obviously litigation that's still pending, but my understanding is that at least at the first stage of litigation, the F-35 was found to meet all of the necessary requirements. I'm sure that litigation will likely continue by those who oppose the F-35, and so we'll have to wait and see how that works out.
How do you feel, Mr. Zuckerman?
Well, I think that discussion was had a number of years ago, and it was clear when public gave its input, along with the environmental impact statement and others, that the federal government did find that it was a safe and appropriate thing to do. And I think it is primarily settled.
Mr. Brock, this question is for you. You're proposing a southern strategy to help return jobs and presumably new residents to the struggling southern counties of the state. Two-part question for you here. How would that work, and how can Vermont return population and economic activity to areas of the state that have seen a steady erosion over the last generation?
Well, one of the major possibilities involves technology. If we take a look at information technology and information technology needs in Vermont, that's a classic example where there's opportunity that's not necessarily dependent upon geography. Vermont is a state traditionally of small businesses that can be located almost anywhere provided there is effective broadband technology. Now, we committed about $200 million in recent years to expanding broadband, and we have not done so quite as successfully in some parts of southern Vermont. We need to refocus our efforts there, and of course, the funding to do that is a critically important piece of this. In expanding our information technology, we have been purchasing a lot of the IT services from companies located overseas. By matching jobs, by matching needs for input of people, by matching some of our immigration needs to those skill sets, there's a real opportunity to develop an information technology industry here in Vermont that does not rely on people coming here temporarily on H-1B and L-1 visas. That's a great opportunity for southern Vermont.
Mr. Zuckerman, Mr. Brock has proposed a southern strategy. How do you see this?
Well, this is another example where my opponent sometimes talks about all the things we need to do, but also says we have no money to do it. So I'm not sure how he'd pay for all that broadband infrastructure and some of those programs. For me, and I did bring it up earlier with cannabis reform, we would actually have increased tourism. People don't maybe know that 100,000 skier visits is $40 million of economic activity. We're proud of our artisanal beers, and we think that's a great piece for our economy. We could do that, which would raise revenues for the state. It would bring the underground economy above board. My opponent cites statistics from DEA-type groups in Colorado that are totally misleading and inaccurate. When you actually look at the population around Vermont that would be interested in coming to Vermont, spend a weekend here, we would generate revenues. That would both help our southern economy because folks would be coming in that area, but also it would give us the revenues not only through cannabis but through tourism sales and others to then invest in broadband technology throughout the state, energy efficiency throughout the state. Those are ways that we can improve our economy.
Cannabis reform has come up a couple of times already, so let's address it. Marijuana legalization failed to advance last session, but isn't going away. So please discuss how you'll act when this comes up again in the next biennium, now that Maine and Massachusetts, which of course is close to southern Vermont, are also voting this fall on legalization. Mr. Zuckerman, we'll start with you.
Sure. Clearly, folks know I've been a lead proponent of bringing our underground economy above board. Primarily, it's because right now, the war on drugs and fighting cannabis use with our teenagers has completely failed. They can get cannabis more easily than they can get alcohol. If we bring it above board, we regulate it, we know we'd have cleaner product for adult responsible use. It wouldn't be laced with pesticides, herbicides, or other drugs. We would separate the relationship of our teenagers with drug dealers with respect to obtaining cannabis. And we would actually improve our economy, and we could address the issue by putting money into prevention, and treatment of our opiate crisis, which is truly our #1 drug problem, and clearly that's from pharmaceutical drugs as a gateway, not cannabis. And we would have money for law enforcement to deal with our roadway issues, where they could have drug recognition officers, and we would then have resources to put into higher education, which frankly is one of the best ways to get young people not to start into drugs, because if you're in 6th, 8th, 10th grade and you think you have a future because you have an opportunity to go to higher education at a lower cost, the investment from this money would reduce your use of cannabis.
And Mr. Brock, same question for you. How will you act when this comes up again in the next biennium?
Well, one of the things I would do first is I'd look at the numbers. And this is a case of 6th grade arithmetic. If you take what's being spent and earned right now in Colorado as a percentage of state revenue and simply apply that to Vermont, you get a number of about $20 million a year in net revenue to Vermont. My opponent, in his various statements about the use of marijuana and what marijuana would produce, continually mixes up total sales of marijuana versus the net tax revenues the state would receive. The $20 million number is the same number that Vermont's Joint Fiscal Office used when it calculated what we would receive in tax revenue from that bill. Colorado, on the other hand, though, 24% of those revenues they receive are from edibles, and edibles are not included in our bill. That further reduces the amount of money that we would receive on a net basis. Their tourist revenue and tourist activity actually is growing faster than ours in Vermont. So it's reasonably comparable. The tax rates are comparable. And where it gets further complicated is when we get to Massachusetts. Massachusetts is proposing a 12% tax, half of ours.
Mr. Zuckerman, you want to rebut that?
Well, I do a couple different factors. One is to compare apples to apples. In order for someone to go to Colorado to be a tourist with a cannabis scenario, they've got to fly, go there for a week. We have a tremendously different population within a couple-hour drive of Vermont. So the numbers don't compare straight apples to apples with Colorado. Also, the bill that we passed in the Senate was far from the bill that actually I would have proposed. It had a very limited production and really didn't remove the underground economy, and therefore it didn't create the numbers. He's absolutely right. The numbers for the bill that passed the Senate was a much smaller number, but that's not the bill that I would propose we do that actually brings the whole underground economy above board, where we can regulate it better and have safer product for our adult responsible use.
Mr. Brock?
The bill that Senator Zuckerman refers to that could be a much larger bill is what Colorado has. Colorado has a much larger and more sophisticated and more extensive drug distribution scenario than Vermont would have under any of the bills proposed. So that's not the issue that affects us. The issue is the net revenues that you receive based on the taxation that you have, and those revenues are much, much lower than Senator Zuckerman claims.
All right, well, we'll move on to Leanne Denyer, but just very briefly, Mr. Zuckerman, or Mr. Brock, yes or no, are you philosophically opposed to legalizing marijuana?
No.
Leanne, you have the next question.
We're actually going to be sticking with the topic just for another moment. Marijuana and the legalization, potential legalization of marijuana was actually the most common theme that we saw in our Facebook and Twitter responses today. So Mr. Brock, you're going to go first. George Klein from Barrie writes us in on Facebook, should marijuana become legal in Vermont, would you support random drug tests for state officials?
I don't think that's any more necessary than random tests for alcohol consumption for state officials, which some might think is a good idea. I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Well, nor would I. I mean, we don't test folks for alcohol consumption 2-3 days later. And just with alcohol, responsible adult use on the weekend at home is reasonable and shouldn't be a part of your workplace scenario.
Thank you very much. An energy question now. Vermont, as you both well know, has established a goal of getting 90% of all of its energy from renewable sources by 2050. And that is often cited by developers of new, large, commercial, industrial wind turbines, which we know are divisive where they're proposed around the state. Should Vermonters who live in host communities have the right to block the turbine project? Why don't we start with you, Mr. Brock?
I believe they absolutely need substantial deference. Whether it's an absolute right to block on a community by community basis or more on a regional basis, I think is something that's open to discussion. But clearly, people are affected by large-scale wind in particular developments. And one of my major concerns about industrial wind is beyond the environmental destruction caused by it, the destruction of habitat, the destruction of our ridgelines, which are in fact not renewable, and the limited amount of energy that comes from such devices. It's a real concern as to whether it makes sense to Vermont. This is particularly true because they're so heavily subsidized that the taxpayers are paying for energy that is of very limited use. Even our own experts in the Public Safety Service Department tell us the amount of energy that we are producing and the amount of clean energy we are producing does not have any impact whatsoever on global warming. It does, though, have an impact on the people in those communities who are hurting as a result.
Mr. Zuckerman?
Well, I'm not a fan of pushing climate change and global warming challenges off on other people. All of us have to take responsibility for improving our situation. Just recently, it became scientifically evident that we are now over 400 parts per million of carbon in our atmosphere, a threshold that has not been broken for 3 million years. We are going to face the warmest scenario ahead of us that humans have ever experienced. We have to do our part. And I don't think that local communities should be able to veto an issue that is for the greater common good. Should we make sure that folks who are affected get either remuneration or compensation or support for challenges they face? Yes. Should we invest more in energy efficiency and try to reduce our consumption in the first place? Yes. Should we work for diversified energy production, solar panels on our already impervious surfaces, small wind turbines? Yes. But should we also support, where appropriate, some large-scale development of wind? Yes. 4 turbines in Georgia produce the power for 10,000 homes. There are scales of efficiency that are productive for Vermont. When you look at the damage from Hurricane Irene, that damage was far greater to our environment than what the damage is of a few small ridgelines.
Do you want to rebut, Mr. Brock?
These wind turbines would not have had any impact whatsoever on the damage caused by Tropical Storm Irene. But it does have an impact on all of the Vermonters who are close by and who are paying the very high costs associated with the premiums for what has really become a gold rush for renewable energy developers. And we have a situation right now that I could only describe as Robin Hood in reverse, in which we are paying premiums to wealthy developers to put industrial wind turbines on our ridgelines, while at the same time increasing substantially the cost to poor and working Vermonters who pay the same amount per kilowatt hour as do the wealthy and who consume a much higher percentage of their income in energy.
Mr. Zuckerman, you get the last word if you'd like.
Well, there's no doubt. One of the reasons I promote energy efficiency and are investing in helping low-income people retrofit their housing, their heating systems, their lighting systems is because low-income people do suffer greater by higher energy prices. But in fact, our push for renewable energy and energy efficiency has actually made our rates now the second lowest in New England, where they used to be some of the highest. Now granted, New England as a whole has high rates. That we can't fully fight when the Southeast has had federal investments in water and then the West has cheap coal, but I don't really think we want to go that direction. So what we need to do is invest in efficiency first and then renewables to make it so that our footprint is smaller and keep our bills down.
I think we all can agree this presidential election season has been unlike anything we've ever seen before. In the latest VPR poll, 76% of the voters in this poll say they are closely watching the presidential race. We are 2 weeks and 1 day away from Election Day, and I'm going to ask both of you this question. For whom will you vote for president? And please share your level of enthusiasm for that choice. Mr. Brock, let's start with you.
I've said many times before that I am voting for a Republican for President of the United States, and that Republican will not be Donald Trump. And I'm still considering my options of which Republican will get that vote.
Mr. Zuckerman.
Well, a couple things. One is I'll be voting for Hillary Clinton. There is no way that I want there to be any opportunity for Donald Trump to be the president of our country. He is an embarrassment to our democracy. He brings vitriol to the office, division and hatred. My overall support was for Bernie Sanders. I thought he talked about bringing people together to solve our problems. I'm not enthusiastic about Hillary, But I've got to say, given the options, I'll take her over Donald Trump any day. And the idea of just blanket voting for Republican, we have to remember that it's been Republican strategy for the last 20 years of division and discord that's led to the Republican Party bringing forth Donald Trump and the voters who support him. So I take real worry at my opponent's comment that Republican, Republican, Republican. The way to send a message about positive discourse in our society and in our civics and government is to say enough is enough. Thank you.
Mr. Brock.
One of the factors to keep in mind is the gross dissatisfaction of so many people in America about how government is working or how government is not working. And we have to remember at the national level who's been in charge of government in terms of the administration for the past 8 years. And that's at the heart of a great deal of that dissatisfaction. Clearly, people are unhappy, but bear in mind that even here in Vermont, 68% of Vermont Republicans did not vote for Donald Trump in the primary election that we held. I think as increasingly I hear from those people in my party concern about the entire system that has led to the selection of 2 people for each of the parties who have such a high level of dissatisfaction among the electorate. And I think both parties need to go back to the drawing board before the 2020 elections and determine how to select people that better represent the views of all of us and that can bring us together.
Just a quick one.
Well, I'll just say briefly, I'm very proud that we've had President Obama for the last 8 years. And the dysfunction in Washington is hands down the result of the Republican Congress. That's shown in polls and that's shown in action. The Republican Congress has been the least effective Congress in at least 50 years, if not 100, at addressing the issues that face ordinary Americans, or actually addressing any issues at all. They have not passed budgets on time. They've not passed bills to deal with housing issues and education. This is the most dysfunctional Congress we've had, and I'm pleased that we've had President Obama.